Identity Negotiation Theory and Cross-Cultural Communications in World Missions. The purpose of this study was to understand how cultural and ethnic identities affect communication in world missions by utilizing the identity negotiation theory and several key factors from it that affect missionaries while on the mission field. The first thing that we really want to ask with this theory is, well, what is it? What is identity negotiation theory? And basically, identity negotiation is based in the socio-cultural tradition. It is created by Stella Toomey, and the goal of it is to help in understanding how oneself is negotiated with different peoples across cultural ethnic barriers. It also helps in understanding how identities are created through another's self-identification. One of the main purposes of the main points that are made by Stella Toomey in identity negotiation theory is that of intercultural competence, which basically is how to effectively communicate across cultural identities or ethnic identities. So she puts forth three really concepts that will help one to be interculturally competent. The first one being identity knowledge, which is really a knowledge of the cultural norms and differences, so that you can effectively know what is different about that culture from your own. So the second point would be cultural mindfulness, which is really more of a sensitivity or integration with the host culture. And then finally, she puts forth the idea of negotiation skill. And this is really the hardest part of intercultural competence because it does require intelligence and skill when negotiating identities. And so it's really, all negotiation skill is the act of communicating identities across cultures. And so the question that bodes is, how then, if we understand intercultural competence, how do cultural and ethnic identities affect communication in world missions? A simple example of how different cultures and ethnic groups view the world would be that of time and event orientations. Someone that's time-oriented is really concerned about punctuality, the amount of time being expended. They're very scheduled with how they do things, goal-directed. Whereas someone that's event-oriented would be a little more concerned for the details of an actual event and not really concerned about the time that's required for the event. An example ethnically of this would be American culture compared to the Filipino culture. From personal experience in that, I can tell you that Americans obviously were more time-oriented. Typically, we really are all about, if an event is to start at 8 o'clock, it starts at 8 o'clock, and it ends at 10. It ends at 10. Whereas in the Philippines, you might start an event at 8 and people show up at 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock, just whenever they can get around to it. But once they're there, their whole mindset and their whole goal is to just be a part of that event, and they could stay till 5, 6 o'clock at night. They're not concerned with the time, they're concerned more with being a part of the event itself. Another few factors that we'll discuss with this is theories of cultural evolution, ethnocentrism, contextualization, and culture shock. The first one is really based on the missionaries' thinking. It used to be, pre-World War I, anthropologists had a way of describing the way in which societies were thought to progress, and that was the theories of cultural evolution, which societies were basically thought to progress from simple to complex organizations, from irrational to rational thought, and from magic to religion, and then finally to science. And so this form of thinking ultimately led to ethnocentrism. And ethnocentrism is really a cultural or ethnic view that believes one's own identity is better and more advanced than another's. It can negatively affect communication across cultural and ethnic identities. And so ethnocentrism is definitely an issue that needs to be addressed when going on the mission field, because that can be something that really negatively affects you when trying to make effective communication. The next concept really kind of plays off of ethnocentrism, and that is the idea of contextualization. Contextualization generally refers to seeing and doing things appropriately given the context of conversation, action, etc. And basically, contextualization has three approaches. It's got you can have a rejection of contextualization, which is really the denial of the old practices of your hosts, seeking to completely change their thinking and change their culture. And this is really ethnocentrism at its worst. Basically you're saying you're going to be like me and we're going to change you because you're still not where we are. The next step would be uncritical contextualization, which basically accepts any traditional belief or practice into the church and views it, most if not all the practices, as basically good. And this can lead to a concept called syncretism, which basically just meshes two religions, and then you can't really see effective change in someone's worldview because they just kind of add everything into one and kind of got this just mishmash, combination of belief systems. And then the final approach to contextualization really is the approach that most missionaries should want to take, which is that of critical contextualization, which examines the beliefs and the customs of cultures, and then it decides, with their belief system, with the Bible, is this simply a cultural difference, or is this something that is truly unbiblical? And so contextualization is a big key to communicating across cultural barriers and helping to change a worldview, which can be very difficult, especially a religious worldview, but also understanding there are certain things that don't need to be changed necessarily. And then the final thing would be that of culture shock. Culture shock has really three stages, and it affects anyone that stays in a country or another culture for a period of time. It's going to happen, sometimes at varying degrees, but there's three stages typically thought, and there's the tourist stage, which is really your first response to a new culture. It's filled with fascination, it's filled with excitement, adrenaline about being in a new place. But then it moves into the crisis stage, which basically, when those excited feelings start to dissipate, it leaves you kind of disenchanted, and you start to see the culture as it really is. And that causes many, many problems: physical, mental, emotional, so on and so forth. It becomes a real issue. That's the main part of culture shock that really affects you. And then you move into the resolution and recovery stage, which really is an acceptance and a integration into the culture that you're now a part of. And so those are the three stages of culture shock that can be effective. It can affect communication across cultural and ethnic identities, because if one is in the crisis stage, they may not be culturally mindful of the host culture. So ultimately, when one examines the factors presented through the lens of identity negotiation theory, it's much easier to not only understand the factors that affect communication, but also how to overcome those factors and be a better communicator in world missions.